Okay, so good afternoon, friends. Hmm. So, how are you feeling today? Hmm. कैसा लग रहा है? Did you find human geography interesting? Hmm. Human geography is actually more interesting than physical geography. The thing is that it is not taught well, the way it should be taught. Okay, so that is one thing. My second question is there anyone sitting in the class who can stand up or who can raise his hand and say that if I ask any question with respect to yesterday's lecture, would be in a position to answer? कोई भी ऐसा है माइका लाल? हाँ, है कोई ऐसा? एक दो तीन चार पाँच छः. ओके, very good. uh, the thing is, even raising hand shows that you have revised, and not raising of the hand clearly shows that there was lacunas in revision. Every day I tell this to you, there is one more person online. Okay, that is very good. तो ये देख रहे हो ना जितने हाथ थे, अगर मैं इसका परसेंटेज निकालूं ऑफ द टोटल नंबर ऑफ पीपल, दिस इज द सेम परसेंटेज ऑफ पीपल हु गेट सिलेक्टेड फ्रॉम ईच क्लास. द रीजन इज वेरी सिंपल. फॉलो द रूल्स ऑफ यूपीएससी. एंड अभी भी डायग्नोसिस इज गोइंग ऑन, एंड हर डायग्नोसिस में नाउ मी एंड प्रांजल हम एक दिन ये भी डिसाइड कर रहे थे कि वाई नॉट रिकॉर्ड मेनी ऑफ द सजेशंस ऑलरेडी, एंड वो पीछे एक स्क्रीन लगा लेते हैं, प्ले कर देंगे. बिकॉज ऑलमोस्ट सबकी तो वही प्रॉब्लम है, सबकी वही प्रॉब्लम है कि कोई रिवाइज नहीं करता है. एवरीबडी इज बिजी इन द न्यू प्रोडक्ट्स विच आर कमिंग इन द मार्केट. तो इट इज ऑल, everything is like this. Okay, so moving on, we have completed the Malthusian theory, and just because we have done the Malthus theory, there is another theory which is NeoMalthusian theory. ठीक है, so इसको भी देख लेते हैं. What is essentially NeoMalthusian? Because Malthusian, NeoMalthusian is more or less same, and NeoMalthusian are essentially the people who believe in the ideas of Malthus. Okay, although there are some subtle differences between them. Here Alok is asking that I did not get how Malthus was supporting capitalism. How many of you are also facing this problem? He didn't get how Malthus was supporting capitalism. Come on यार, हमने लिखा भी था उसको. देखो आलोक पकड़ा गया. He didn't revise. Didn't we write when we were talking about the population policy suggestions given by Malthus that he was essentially a supporter of capitalism? And जो space and time वाला है, फिर से अभी मैं जब when I'll talk about Marx and when we'll do the comparison of Malthus and Marx, then we'll again talk about that. उसको फिर से बात करेंगे. ठीक है? So coming back to what we are doing, we are going to talk about the Neo-Malthusian. So नाम से ही पता चल रहा है Neo-Malthusian, that means the new Malthus or the new Malthusian idea. So you can see the term was first used in 1877 by Dr. Samuel van Houten. And if we talk about Neo-Malthusian, who are these people? In general, Neo-Malthusians are the people who share similar views as that of Malthus. And what was the similar view of which they are sharing with Malthus? What was the basic view? If I have to say something, if I ask you that summarize Malthus, what would you be saying? Can we say his basic idea was that the population capacity to grow itself is much higher than the resource growth, which ultimately leads to a population crisis. Can we say that? Okay. So that is the basic idea of Malthus. So these people, they also have a similar view as Malthus. So they argue that since world resources are limited, there are natural limits to the number of people that Earth can support with a reasonable standard of living. Okay? With a reasonable standard of living. So this is basically what? This is the world's carrying capacity of the world. So we had seen this idea, if you remember. So did we saw that there is a carrying capacity? So they are also of the same view that there is a carrying capacity of the earth. So the idea of carrying capacity of the world has been further elaborated in recent times by the concept of limits to growth. Okay. So if you have seen the syllabus, how many of you have seen the syllabus? In which topic limits to growth is? ठीक है, ये बहुत अच्छा तरीका है. It is in economic geography. It is not in models and theories. It is given in economic geography. ठीक है? Very good. Some of you on the internet, you are more, we can say, obedient than the ones who are sitting in the class. Okay. So limits to growth. Suppose if I have to write separately on NeoMalthusian, suppose मुझे 20 marker भी लिखना पड़ गया. Can I use limits to growth to elaborate on neo-Malthusian ideas? Obviously, yes. ठीक है? So in recent times, the limits to growth, which tries to establish the relationship between population and resource development in the modern perspective. So बाद में देखेंगे, limits to growth is the idea which sees that no matter what we do, ultimately there will be a limits to growth. ठीक है? So it talks about 7 scenarios, which is referred to as the 7 runs of the model. It uses system analysis and supercomputers to ultimately extrapolate what will be happening in the future. And through that, it finds that there is limits to growth that would be applied on the mankind. Okay, so we'll be facing several problems. Can you understand that recent COVID-19 was a kind of evidence for them, although we have seen that how COVID-19 can be also implicated as a result of several other reasons or factors. But for them, COVID-19 was a kind of limits to growth, where ultimately what happened, there was so many mortalities throughout the world which occurred. Okay? So this is essentially referred to as the neo-Malthusian. Okay? Although they support Malthusian view, it is different from the conventional Malthusian theory. And how it is different from the conventional Malthusian theory in number of ways. ठीक है? ये question is very probable difference between Malthus and neo-Malthus. ठीक है? It is a probable question which can be asked. So number of things. Neo-Malthusians, what they do, they explicitly identify working class with the problem of overpopulation. ठीक है? That means working class कौन सा होता है? It is the poor class. ठीक है? So they explicitly implicate the poor class with the problem of overpopulation. That means they agree that it is the poor class who has the highest birth rate. and as a result responsible for the overpopulation which is taking place. The overcrowded industrial slums were identified as sites of moral degeneration and hotspots of population growth. Okay. Now, why we are saying here they are different from Malthus? Because in Malthusian idea, it was there. The same thing was also talked about by Malthus. He also implicated the working class, but implicitly. Okay. So this same idea, how it is different, if you want, you can write there itself. In Malthusian idea, this was implicit. This was implicit. Okay. Yes, Vikrant is correct. This question has already been actually asked in 2020 mains. Okay. So it was implicit. How it was implicit in Malthus, how we can know? Malthus, in his writings at one place, he has written that when he was writing about the population policy, if you remember, yesterday we talked about the population policy. So when he was writing about the population policy, he believed that it is the market, which enforces the same discipline which or discipline in the labor or working class as it was found in the middle class. As it was found in the middle class. Okay. So that means, can we say he is saying that middle class has a discipline, and this discipline is in terms of what? In terms of number of children which they produce. Okay. So they had a kind of discipline, they were producing less number of children. But what was happening? The same discipline was missing in the working class. Okay. So if we apply the market based mechanisms, हमने देखा था markets has its own incentives and disincentives. So that market based mechanisms would enforce the same discipline of the middle class also in the working class. ठीक है. So अब यहां पर उसने explicit तो नहीं बोला है. Can we say he is implicit? He is implicitly saying that overpopulation is caused by whom? The working class is causing the overpopulation. Okay, I hope it is clear. So that is the first point. Another aspect is that it explicitly stresses on birth control methods. This is very important point. Birth control measures, that is the preventive checks, and including the use of contraceptives. Okay. So this is a very significant difference. We have seen that Malthus was a clergyman. He was very much guided by his religious belief systems, and thus he didn't advocate the use of contraceptives, which was widely used in those contemporary day France of that period. Okay. So he didn't advocate that. But if you talk about the neo-Malthusians are very clearly advocating the use of contraceptives to control the population. So neo-Malthusians saw that increased aid from the developed to developing world would create even bigger problems of population than slowing it, because Malthusian principle proposed a direct relationship between resource growth and population growth. Thus, foreign aid will lead to even larger population. Thus, it is necessary to promote birth control measures to prevent scenario of overpopulation. Okay. So, देखो, you know very well that after the Second World War, lots of developing countries, majority of developing countries became independent. Now, as they became independent, most of these developing countries, they embarked upon their own development paths. Like, for example, India started its planned development period. ठीक है, 5-year plans हमने अपने start किए, so we embarked upon our own development paths. Now, as the countries would embark upon their own development path, can we say they would be doing lots of investment in many of the sectors? One of the problems they were facing was food security. So, they would have invested in agriculture? They would have invested in agriculture. Other problems like health, they would have invested in health infrastructure as well. ठीक है, अब फूड सिक्योरिटी भी बढ़ जाए और हेल्थ भी इंप्रूव हो जाए, what will be the impact of this on mortality? Mortality would decline. So in the developing countries, if mortality is declining, but can we say these developing countries were still socially backward? That means what will be the impact of this social backwardness on fertility? It would remain high. So what will happen with the gap between mortality and fertility? It would widen. And does this mean that the population growth rate of these developing countries would become high? Okay. So after the Second World War, this was very clearly seen that the population growth of the developing countries was seen to be becoming very fast. And add over this the population base. Tell me, can we say many of these developing countries have very large population base as well? Yes or no? So percentage of growth भी high है, base भी high है, ठीक है? Ultimately, there was a fear in the developed world that what will happen if their population continues to grow? That means what will happen to the resource? Can we say they will utilize their own resources? And the extravaganza life they had lived in the colonial period on the resources of the developing countries, would they be able to again do so? It would become difficult. Take the example of Paris climate deal, the climate change. Okay? You must have read that the common but differentiated responsibility was diluted as a principle, and ultimately now the countries, each of the countries have to give their own targets for reduction. And particularly this was done to make sure what? To make sure that some of the countries which are important emitters like China and India, भले ही इनका per capita emission is low, but when it comes to the total emission, what is essentially happening? It is quite high. Okay, it is very high. So even if the developed world countries cut their emissions to zero, then also what will be taking place? Then also because of the emission done by the developing countries, you won't be able to control the global warming. So it was very, very necessary that all the countries contribute in the cutting of the emissions, particularly these developing countries. ठीक है, तो अब देखो, because developing countries began to grow, can we say the atmosphere has a limited capacity of recycling the greenhouse gases? ठीक है, पहले the developed world was emitting lots of greenhouse gases. अब इसमें developing countries का भी add हो गया, तो basically क्या हुआ? It became very sharp. So the scope for them to exploit the resources, did it reduce? हो गया ना? If suppose ये developing countries का नहीं होता, तो they would have continued to emit and the crisis would have taken much longer period. Yes or no? But because the developing countries emission is also added into that now, there is a crisis, a climate crisis we are already facing. Now, इस climate crisis की वजह से, tell me, can we say that so many developed countries have been now forced to cut their emissions? Yes or no? ठीक है? So we will later see जब हम population policy की बात करेंगे तो I'll explain you all this. This period was the period when the western world began to see कि यहाँ पर population boom होने वाला है. ठीक है, there was a ticking population bomb, and this population bomb ultimately would mean that their own affluence level would have to be in future compromised. ठीक है, so there was a big worry in the developed world. ठीक है, that ultimately we have to do something to reduce the population of the developing world. ठीक है, and because इस समय they were already preparing for neo-colonialism. Neo-colonialism is basically the globalization. ठीक है, so they were already preparing for that. So they were starting to give lots of aid to the developing countries. And this set of neo-Malthusians argued that if you are giving lots of resources to the developing countries without any strings attached to it, without certain conditions to be fulfilled, what it would mean that the more resources mean more population, direct Malthusian formula. And this would give even bigger problem in the developing world, because ultimately in developing, simple si baat hai, if the economic growth is suppose this and population growth is this, what will happen to the per capita income? It would decrease. Okay? So the problem which we are trying to solve, this problem would be even more. As a result, it was during this period they ultimately began to argue that you have to force the developing countries to do what? To promote the birth control measures. Okay? And we see that definitely most of the developing countries formulated the policies of fertility control. And among these, one of the major instruments was the use of birth control measures, including the contraceptive use. Okay? So again, this is a very important difference between Malthusian and Neo-Malthusian. Then third difference is that they have done what? They have expanded the concept of resources. Malthus primarily was concerned with what? Was concerned with subsistence. Mainly he was concerned with the food resources. But when we talk about the Neo-Malthusians, like take the case of limits to growth, they are not talking only about the resource, food resource, but all types of resources, including the energy, the mineral, every type of resources they are talking about. So that is the basic difference between, the third basic difference between the two. Okay, so I hope it is clear. So both are more or less talking about the same thing. Both are negative, both are pessimists, both are determinist. Okay. So both of them have this idea, but there are subtle differences between them. Okay. So that is the Neo-Malthusian. So like Malthus, they also had static view of resources and is still forms the basic of the Neo-Malthusian assertion. Thus, they have also limited belief in the role of technological development in the resource growth. So they also have the pessimistic view. Now, I'll give you one activity to do. Let us see how many of you are able to do that. And this question is, write a critique of Neo-Malthusian viewpoint. Write a critique of the Neo-Malthusian viewpoint. And you have got 2 minutes. Yes, yes. You can write. The difference was Malthus didn't advocate the artificial birth control measures like use of contraceptives, but they essentially advocated that. Okay, so you have got 2 minutes to brainstorm and frame your answer. ओके, माय क्वेश्चन इज, कल हमने एक इक्वेशन देखी थी, किसने किसने वो इक्वेशन यूज की? इट इज एज सिंपल एज दैट यार। पी का मतलब क्या है? पॉपुलेशन विच इज माल्थुसियन आइडिया। ए इज एफ्लुएंस विच इज मार्क्सियन आइडिया। टी इज टेक्नोलॉजी विच इज टेक्नोसेंट्रिक आइडिया। सो अगर मुझे इसको क्रिटिसाइज करना है तो आई विल यूज दीज। इफ आई हैव टू क्रिटिसाइज दिस, then what I'll do, I'll use these। बहुत सिंपल है, ठीक है। सो if I am writing about neo-Malthusian, a critique of neo-Malthusian, clearly when you have to write a critique, बहुत specifically mentioned है। So 30% should be what is neo-Malthusian, I have to explain that। And second, around 60 to 70% of your answer should be about the criticism, with respect to the criticism. So tell me, if I am writing introduction, could I have said, I could have used this name, Samuel Van Houten? So I would say that in 1877, it was Samuel Van Houten who coined the term neo-Malthusian, and enough of introduction, main body पे सीधे आ जाओ। And here what I'll do, first I'll define what is neo-Malthusian idea. So what was neo-Malthusian idea? Neo-Malthusian are the set of people who follow the same ideology of Malthus. That is what? That there is the population growth is higher than that of the resource growth, and thus ultimately there is arrival of population crisis or resource crisis. So I will first define what is neo-Malthusian, ठीक है। Once I have defined, थोड़ा सा और भी कुछ लिख सकता हूं। Can I give example? Can I give example of neo-Malthusian? Like अभी हमने बात किया था लिमिट्स टू ग्रोथ थ्योरी। लिमिट्स टू ग्रोथ थ्योरी इज एन एग्जाम्पल ऑफ नियो-माल्थुसियन, ठीक है। और भी नाम यूज किए थे, अगर याद हो तो कल हमने एक नाम यूज किया था, रॉबर्ट Kaplan. He is also what? Supporter of the neo-Malthusian idea. ठीक है, so I can just talk about first part, what is essentially neo-Malthusians. Then I will move on to writing the critique of the neo-Malthusian. And can I write one critique which is टेक्नोसेंट्रिक क्रिटिक? टेक्नोसेंट्रिक क्रिटिक लिख सकते हैं। कैन आई से मोर और लेस सेम होगा जो हमने लिखा था? यस और नो? ठीक है, बाद में हम पढ़ेंगे लिमिट्स टू ग्रोथ। इफ आई हैव टू गिव एग्जाम्पल, कैन आई टेक इट एज एग्जाम्पल? वहां से एग्जाम्पल्स उठा सकता हूं, लिमिट्स टू ग्रोथ का एग्जाम्पल उठा सकता हूं। और कल हमने 3 एग्जाम्पल्स लिए थे, तीनों एग्जाम्पल्स में डिड वी टॉक अबाउट द टेक्नोसेंट्रिक क्रिटिसिज्म ऑफ ईच ऑफ द 3 एग्जाम्पल्स? कुड आई हैव यूज्ड इट हियर? Definitely I could have used it here. Same thing, there is Marxian criticism, and Marxian criticism simple hai. Marx believed in what? Marx believed that the problem is not that of resource availability, but it is that of resource distribution. ठीक है? There is unequal distribution of resources in the capitalistic setup. Where in capitalistic setup, what is taking place? There is exploitation of the poor, which is the majority, by the rich, which is the minority. And this exploitation essentially becomes the cause of the crisis or the problems. ठीक है? कल हमने 3 एग्जाम्पल्स लिए थे, उसमें इनके भी क्रिटिसिजम्स देखे थे. आई कैन कुड हैव यूज दैट. ठीक है? So that is basically what you had to write. I hope it is clear. So कहने का मतलब बस एक है. What I wanted to explain you here is that many times, in fact majority of times, questions might look very different, but the answer would be there with you. You will have to just explore which thing which I have studied can be used there. And this is the smart way of preparation. ठीक है? अब मुझे बताओ कि मैंने तुम्हें इसमें फॉर्मेट बता दिया. Yes, Vikrant is correct. We could have also added the humanist criticism, उसको भी ऐड कर सकते थे. अब देखो, मेरे को सिंपल सी एक बात बताओ कि which is a better method. There are two methods. First method, मैं अलग से इसके लिए भी ये नोट बना लेता हूं. ठीक है? अलग से क्रिटिसिज्म फिर से लिख लेता हूं फ्रॉम दिस पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू. एंड देर इज अदर मेथड, मैं अलग से नहीं लिखता हूं, मैंने दिमाग में अपने फ्रेम बना लिया, या यहां पर एक फ्रेमवर्क बना लिया जहां पर मैंने लिख दिया मार्क्सियन, टेक्नोसेंट्रिक, ह्यूमनिज्म, एंड दैट्स इट. नो मोर ऑफ राइटिंग. विच इज अ स्मार्टर वे ऑफ प्रिपरेशन? कैन आई से द सेकेंड वन? ठीक है? बिकॉज उसमें मेरे को बाद में जब रिवाइज करने के लिए, विल देयर बी लेस नंबर ऑफ पेजेस टू रिवाइज? यस और नो? तो ये तुम लोगों को ये चीज डेवलप करना बहुत ज्यादा जरूरी है. वॉट यू पीपल आर डूइंग इज अ काइंड ऑफ नॉट अ स्मार्ट वर्क. वो स्मार्ट वर्क नहीं है. यू आर accumulating content for every topic, but there are so many topics where there is essentially overlapping. वो जरूरत नहीं है. Many times I have seen people making current affairs notes, और वो current affairs notes में वो भी लिख रहे हैं जो कि ऑलरेडी तुम्हारे नोट्स में लिखा हुआ है. And what you are doing, you are just doubling the content. और दोनों को तुम्हें अलग से पढ़ना पड़ेगा, अलग से टाइम देना पड़ेगा, अलग से रिवाइज करना पड़ेगा, which makes the already complicated problem a more problematic issue. ठीक है? So that is how you have to do that. Yes. How they are? Yes, you are correct. मेरे मुंह से ही निकल गया. Because here Vikrant had written, तो मैं उस समय कुछ और बोल रहा था, and just in the way I said that. Yes, we can say that they are not anti-humanists, so please correct that अगर लिख लिया है तो. They are not anti-humanists. Because ultimately we have to understand that they are believing in the capacity of the humans to control their numbers. ठीक है? So from that perspective, they are not anti-humanists. The actual term should have been that they are determinist. They are determinist. Okay. So that is basically the Neo-Malthusian. Then I am directly first going to one of the topics which we have to cover, and rest of the theories we'll be covering after that. And this is the Marxian theory of population. What is the page number? Page number 12. Okay, so Marxian theory of population. So if we talk about the Marxian theory of population, first very important thing for us to understand about the Marxian theory of population is that Marx didn't give any separate theory for population. Okay? So first very important thing is Marx did not give any separate population theory. Okay. Now, if he has not given any separate population theory, then why we are talking about the population theory of Marx? It is lots of writings on population are part and parcel of his book, that is the Das Capital. Okay. So what we find that the underwritings on population, लिख लो इसको, the underwritings on population and demography, population and demography are part and parcel of his book Das Capital. His book Das Capital. Okay. So that is the Marxian beginning of the Marxian theory of population. अब इसको पहले मैं simplify करके समझा देता हूँ and then we'll see what essentially to do with this. So Marx की जो theory है, it is also a kind of first important thing. It is also what? It is a deductive theory. ठीक है? So it is also what? A deductive theory of population, and it is deduced from his larger law principle which he formulated, and this was the principle of historical materialism. Historical materialism. So it is deduced from his idea of historical materialism. Okay. Now, in his theory, first another few more things. His theory, if you talk about, it can be also treated as a critique of capitalism. Okay. So it is essentially what? It is a critique of capitalism. What does this means? His theory is essentially applicable to which type of settings? Capitalistic setting. So it means that his theory is applicable to which type of settings? Capitalistic politico-economic settings. It is applicable to capitalistic politico-economic settings. So tell me, is it a difference? Is it different from Malthus? Yes or no? Obviously, yes. Malthusian theory was meant to be a natural law. It was meant to be universally applicable. So it is just applicable to the capitalistic settings. Okay? So what Marx says, he believes that in capitalism, there are two classes found. Two classes. And if we talk about these two classes, capitalism matlab yahan par capitalistic society. So in a capitalistic society, there are two classes. The entire society is divided into two parts. One is the rich, which are your capitalists, and the other one is the poor, which is the labor. Very clearly, rich, they form what? They are the minority. They represent the minority population. While if you talk about the poor, poor form the majority population. Majority population. Okay. Now, very important variable in a capitalistic society is what? It is the wage. The wage which is given by the capitalist to the laborers. Okay. The wage rates which are given. So, what is essentially happening, the rich, what they're doing, they are in the process of exploiting the poor. Okay? And what they're doing in the process, they are accumulating surplus. There is surplus of income or capital which is getting accumulated by the rich by exploitation of the poor. अब देखते हैं कि ये होता कैसे. ठीक है? How does this happens? So if we talk about the rich, what they're doing, these are the people who have the capital. ठीक है? They have the capital. याद है कल मैंने एक डायग्राम बनाया था where we saw that with the beginning of feudalism, the gap between rich and poor continued to increase. So actually, the rich or the capitalists were the same people who were the feudal landlords. Ultimately, what happened? There was a kind of plateauing occurred in agriculture, where productivity couldn't be increased in multiple manner, and thus the income couldn't be increased in that manner. Luckily, that time was also the period of industrial revolution, and ultimately because of that, now there was growth of industry, so they began to invest in those industries. So these people, they own capital, they are the owners of capital. Now what they will do, this capital they would do investment of कैपिटल. ठीक है? बाद में देखेंगे कैपिटल इन्वेस्टमेंट भी दो तरह का होता है, प्रोडक्टिव एंड नॉन प्रोडक्टिव इन्वेस्टमेंट. ठीक है? सो प्रोडक्टिव इन्वेस्टमेंट कौन सा होता है? विच इज इन्वॉल्व इन प्रोडक्शन ऑफ सम कोमोडिटीज लाइक द फैक्ट्रीज फॉर एग्जाम्पल. ठीक है? So that is referred to as the productive investment. So here we are talking about which type of investment? The productive investment mainly. So investment, they are involved in the investment of the capital. Okay? And with this capital, they would create what? They would create factories and production systems. Factories and the production systems would be created by them. ठीक है? So ultimately what they would do, what will be their primary aim? The primary aim would be to make this system or the production system very efficient. ठीक है? So what is their objective? Their objective is to make this production system efficient? प्रोडक्शन सिस्टम एफिशिएंट, ठीक है। सो इसका एक एग्जांपल लेते हैं बेटर समझने के लिए। सपोज देयर इज सम वर्क और अ डब्ल्यू वर्क इज टू बी डन, ठीक है। अब इस डब्ल्यू वर्क को करने में जो टोटल मनी दैट दे विल बी गेटिंग आउट ऑफ दैट, इट वुड बी 10 लेबर मनी, ठीक है। नाउ थिंक, if they can reduce the total when it is being produced. Normally, if a labor works, suppose the labor is able to work, this work can be done by 6 labor. So what is the surplus which is available to them? It is 4. So this 4 labor becomes the surplus, or essentially it becomes the profit that they would be achieving. Now think, if they can somehow reduce this labor further, can I say this would mean that there will be more surplus, more profits which will be attained? So this labor, अब इस labor में एक तो चीज ये हो सकती है, कई तरीके से हो सकता है ये। For example, think, can we say one way is if this work can be done by machines, there will be reduction in the labor, more profit. Many times it is not possible, ठीक है। If I reduce the wage rate, if I give lower wages to the labor, does it means that actually there is more profit or the surplus which would remain with the capitalists? Yes or no? So essentially what they would do, they would provide initially, they would be providing lower wage rates to the labor. अब उसमें भी there is a factor of demand and supply. अभी हम देखेंगे how it works. But they would try to give lower wage rate to the laborers. And in the meantime, with technological development, further exploitation would take place. They'll develop the technology, the machines, and ultimately with that also what will happen? They will try to earn more and more surplus. ठीक है? So what they are doing, they are trying to make the production system very efficient. And with this, what they are earning? They are earning surplus capital is being earned. ठीक है? With this surplus capital, tell me, can we say that this surplus capital will be again invested and the cycle will go on? So can we say they would continue to become more and more rich? ठीक है? They'll essentially continue to become more and more rich. बाद में when we'll talk about radicalism in perspectives in human geography, तब देखेंगे और how much ridiculous the system is. How much literally the system is ridiculous. हमारे ही पैसे बैंक से उठा करके what they are doing? They are giving wages to us only. ठीक है? Most of these capitalists, if you just take back the loans which they have taken from the public institutions, ठीक है? They'll have to ultimately beg. This is the situation. Whatever, but ultimately what is happening? They are earning this surplus capital and again investing. So what happens? With this cycle, they continue to become rich. They continue to become rich. Now, coming to the labor or the poor class, so poor class, here Marx treats the labor as basically what? A commodity. ठीक है. So when we are talking about this labor, it is treated by Marx as essentially what? A commodity. It is essentially a commodity. And tell me, commodities can be sold? Yes or no? Commodities essentially can be sold. So labor or the poor, they only have one aspect or one thing, that is the labor, which is the commodity that they can sell and earn money. ठीक है. So labor have, they are, वहां पर उनके, they were owners of capital. Here they are owners of only one commodity, that is labor. Only one commodity, that is labor. ठीक है. So what they're doing, they can see that what the capitalists are doing. Capitalists are involved in capital accumulation. They are involved in capital accumulation. So in response, the laborers or the poor people, they are involved in accumulation of labor. ठीक है. So in response to capital accumulation by the rich, poor are involved in accumulation of labor. Accumulation of labor. ठीक है. और ये accumulation of labor कैसा होगा? By increasing their birth rate. ठीक है. So this is achieved by increase in birth rate. ठीक है. You must have heard this kind of saying that if there are more people in the home, जितने लोग उतने हाथ, and the more work can be done, more people can earn. ठीक है. So same is the feeling that is there in the poor household. They feel that more the people, more the members in the family, there will be more hands to earn. And essentially, thus what happens, their birth rate would be higher. You can understand, even there is child labor, even children are working. That is also an additional help. So there is this increase in the birth rate. Now tell me, if there is increase in the birth rate, what will happen with the supply of labor? So this would cause supply of labor to increase. ठीक है. Now if the supply of labor is increasing but demand is not increasing at the same rate, so what will happen with between the gap between the supply and demand? It would increase. ठीक है. So as a result of this, gap between demand and supply of labor increases. Demand and supply of the labor increases. Now, if there is increase in the demand and supply of labor, tell me, we were talking about this wage rate. Now, is the capitalist in position to further exploit the labor by reducing the wage rate? ठीक है. So this would mean that there would be reduction in wage rate. Reduction in wage rate. So reduction in wage rate का मतलब क्या हुआ? Can we say that they will become more poor? ठीक है. And what will be the response they know? Can we say this will be the response? Further accumulation of labor? ठीक है. So reduction in wage rate means increase in poverty, which further does what? Further accumulation of labor by increasing birth rate. By increasing the birth rate. And tell me, does it means that there will be now more number of people who wouldn't even get jobs? ठीक है. So this would create what? This would create an industrial reserve army. This would essentially lead to creation of an industrial reserve army. ठीक है. So if there is industrial reserve army, tell me, can we say that the capitalists would always be in a position to hire and fire the labor at their will? Yes or no? By giving any wages, very, very lower wages, people will be willing to work for very lower wages. So there will be further what? There will be, this would lead to further reduction in the wages. And can we say this means that the poor will continue to become poor? And what will happen with the gap between rich and poor? It would keep on increasing. It would keep on increasing. Can we say, बाद में भी देखेंगे हम, is it happening today? Yes or no? Did we saw that the number of billionaires in India have increased? But when it comes to the poverty, simultaneously there is also poverty increasing. ठीक है. So same thing is taking place. Reduction in wage rate, increase in poverty, and further accumulation of the labor. So again, so the same thing which we drew, there was initially presence of a primitive communism, and there was feudalism which started. With the beginning of this feudalism, the gap between rich and poor increased. In between there came the capitalism. जब economic geography करेंगे तो we'll further divide the phases of capitalism and we'll see how there was mercantile capitalism and various other stages of capitalism कैसे कैसे हुए हैं. So there is capitalism, and within this capitalism already there was this rich class and already there was this poor class. So what has happened, as the capitalism has continued, the gap between rich and poor has also continued. ठीक है. So this is the basic idea of Marx. And can we say what will be the scenario which would be found in this labor class with respect to demographic parameters? Can we say population growth rate in this class would be high, population density would be high? What will be the other parameters, like for example socioeconomic parameters? There will be poverty, there will be unemployment. With respect to health parameters, there will be very low conditions would be found. Okay? So all those things which Malthus had talked about as a result of the positive checks, can I say they would be here also found? So the same phenomena, those same population problems have been explained by Marx in a different manner than that of Malthus. Okay? So he is also explaining those population problems, but from a more economic perspective. Okay? This is more of an economic theory of population, which is essentially giving. Okay? So this is the scenario which is taking place. Now, Marx says that, however, this would never continue indefinitely. Okay? So this cannot continue indefinitely, because remember, when we are saying poor, can I say they are majority? And if you talk about the rich, they are in minority. Okay? So then what happens? Marx says, he talks about the solutions. Okay? So for him, the solution would be, now I am drawing a dotted line. This means that it will happen. It hasn't happened, it will happen. So what will be the solution? It would be a revolution. A violent revolution, in fact, the term he uses. There will be a violent revolution where the majority would overthrow the minority. Okay? And with this revolution, ultimately, in future, there will be development of another system, will reach to that point, an ideal point, which will be the modern communism. ठीक है? इसी थ्योरी को हम क्या कहते हैं? हिस्टोरिकल मेटेरियलिज्म. So historical materialism theory was actually based upon the historical study of Europe. Okay? So he essentially formulated this historical materialism, which was in fact an inductive theory. But from this theory, this general theory which was formulated, several other ideas have been deduced. So population idea from this has been deduced, and that is why we call it as the deductive theory. Okay? So ultimately, with that violent revolution, what will be taking place? There will be establishment of modern communism. And this modern communism, can we say it is a situation of optimum population? It is a very ideal stage, which is a situation of the optimum population. And what was the condition of optimum population? What was the definition which we saw? So it is a situation where highest possible living standards are achieved by maximum possible numbers. Okay? So that is the situation when there is development of the communism as has been explained by Marx. Okay? Now, if I look into the concept of optimum population, does it differs from the concept of optimum population of Malthus? And what is the difference? डिड आई से एक हमने डायग्राम ड्रॉ किया था, वहां पे एक पॉइंट बनाया था ओ, और साथ में मैंने बताया था कि ऑप्टिमम पॉपुलेशन इन केस ऑफ माल्थस इज अ टेम्पररी सिचुएशन. हियर इज इट टेम्पररी? Definitely no. It is a more of a permanent situation. Once you reach to the situation of communism, what will happen? This optimum population, the society would continue to remain in the situation of optimum population. Okay? It is a very ideal stage for Marx. So once you reach to that ideal stage, what will happen? This situation of optimum population would continue. How it would continue? How it would continue? Marx, very important thing about Marx was that he was actually a believer in the potential of technology. He was a believer in the potential of technology to continue to increase the level of resources. ठीक है, बट टेक्नोलॉजी के टर्म्स में वन मोर थिंग यू शुड रिमेंबर अबाउट मार्क्स, जो अभी पहले बताया था. He was believer that the technology can continue to increase the level of resource, but he was also aware that this technology is actually misused in the capitalistic system to exploit the labor. ठीक है, so thus he was critical of technology. So if you want, you can write, although he was critical of technology in the capitalistic setup, in the capitalist where it was used to exploit the poor by the rich. ठीक है, so in capitalistic setup technology is playing a negative role, but the same technology in communist setup it begins to play what? It begins to play a positive role. ठीक है, so आगे लिख लो, however the technology begins to play a more positive role, begins to play a more positive role in the capitalistic setup. Sorry, in the communist setup. In the communist setup, as it is used to increase the level of resources, increase the level of resources which will be available for all, which will be available for all. In other words, available for all का मतलब क्या होगा? Fair distribution of resources. Bracket में you can write fair distribution of resources. ठीक है, so what he is trying to say, why the society would remain in optimum population, because one side there is resource growth taking place. ठीक है, on the other side what happens, there is also population growth, and population growth does not outpaces the resource growth. Why? Because if people have become, their economic capacity has increased, will they become more educated, more aware, and more, definitely when it comes to demographic factors, more disciplined. And thus what will happen, they will control their own numbers. ठीक है, so आगे लिख लो, simultaneous to the growth of resources, simultaneous to the growth of resources, population also continues to grow. Population also continues to grow. to stop. However, this population growth does not exceeds the resource growth as the people themselves control or keep a check on their population numbers in a communist society. Keep a check on their population numbers in a communist society. ठीक है? So communist society का मतलब क्या होता है? A society which is controlled by community. ठीक है? Not by few individuals. So such society is referred to as the communist society. So this is the basic idea of Marx. I hope it is clear. The principle or the theory of Marx. You'll see that kitna logical सी बात है what he is saying, and we actually see कि it is very much applicable. There are many faults also, many things they would not be applicable in the modern society. But the basic principle which he is trying to explain, that is very clearly we can see even today, which is taking place. ठीक है? बट आज के टाइम में भी अगर किसी को बोलो ऐसे कि यू आर कम्युनिस्ट, what ultimately that person feels, most of the people will feel ashamed, because communism has earned so much bad name. ठीक है? So much bad name. You can understand that America, बाद में geopolitics में देखेंगे, America was so much afraid of communism that they have entire policy of containment of communism. ठीक है? They treated communism as something like contagious. So एक domino theory आया which says that if in a region one country become communist, it is so much contagious that all the countries of the region would become communist. There would be a domino effect. ठीक है? So एक पूरा policy बनाया the containment of communism, because ultimately which is in favor of people, most of the people once they know they would adopt. ठीक है? And you know, media is like, it is run by the capitalistic setup. Education institutions, mostly they are run by the capitalistic setup. So most of them would teach you that they are the faults of capitalism, communism. और भी लोग थे जिन्होंने कम्युनिज्म को बदनाम कर दिया. टेक द एग्जांपल ऑफ रशिया. After Russian Revolution, Russia talked about establishing communism. But the first thing they did, they dismantled, destroyed the labor unions, which is the core of communism, the labor union. So they were never communists, they were authoritarian. It was a kind of authoritarian system which had a mix of communism to get legitimacy. ठीक है? अब उनको क्योंकि लेजिटिमेसी चाहिए थी तो वो कह के हम मार्क्स के फॉलोअर्स हैं, वी आर कम्युनिस्ट. अमेरिका के लिए भी ये बहुत सहूलियत की बात थी, एंड दे ऑल्सो एसेंशली इट वॉज ऑल्सो कन्वीनियंट फॉर देम. उनको भी दिखाना था वर्ल्ड को कि देखो ऐसा होता है कम्युनिज्म. सो इट वॉज विन विन फॉर बोथ, एंड अल्टीमेटली we see that so many good ideas ultimately they didn't become so much popular. Okay, coming back to the Marxist population theory, I hope you have got this. There's one question here: why gap between demand and labor will increase as increased labor will also act as market for production? Remember, Alok, this is something which you have to understand here, that when we are doing productive investment, okay, there will be a limit up till which the productive investment will be done. Remember, yesterday we were talking about the concept of diminishing returns. Okay, so what will happen once you keep on investing, the law of diminishing return would play, and ultimately what will happen with your profits? They will keep reducing. There will be a limited demand for certain commodities. Okay? Now, a very good question he has asked. Now tell me, when Marx is saying this, okay, that there will be the gap between the labor supply and demand would increase, he clearly means that suppose this is the investment and this is the labor supply. So investment or labor demand. Okay. So now tell me, does he implicitly supports the basic conception of Malthus that the capacity of the population to reproduce itself is higher than the resource growth? Yes or no? ठीक है. So very clearly हम बाद में देखेंगे जब भी comparison करेंगे तो there are several similarities and differences between them. So one of the very clear similarity is that both of them, in a way, Malthus was more explicit. Here it is what? He is more implicit. But he also believes that the capacity of the population to grow itself is very, very high. And we'll see majority of the theories इसको believe करती हैं. ठीक है? So that is the marks. So अब इसको हम अगर summarize करें just, so what will be the things which we'll be writing? Suppose if we have to write about Marx, so can we say that Marx theory first of all is based upon the theory of historical materialism के idea पर based है, and from this what he deduces, from this he deduces an assumption. He is deducing an assumption, and what is the assumption he is deducing? That in capitalist society, there are two classes which are found. Okay, and which are these two classes? One is the capitalist and the other is the labor class. Okay, so these two he is taking into account. Now ये एक तरह से सिस्टम थ्योरी है. ही इज यूजिंग अ सिस्टम थ्योरी, ऑल्दो उस टाइम पर सिस्टम एनालिसिस नाम की कोई चीज नहीं होती थी. ठीक है, बट ही वॉज इन अ वे डेवलपिंग अ सिस्टम्स थ्योरी. व्हाट इज सिस्टम्स थ्योरी? सिस्टम्स थ्योरी में there is a system which has its boundaries, it has components, and these components are interlinked to each other through certain processes. ठीक है, so this is basically the systems theory. So he is essentially using a systems theory. So this is the assumption which he is deriving or deducing from the historical materialism. Now in this theory of his, he takes some variables. There are some variables or components. And two most important components are capitalists and labor. These are the two most important components. Okay, then these are interrelated to each other through certain processes. So what are the processes through which they are interrelated? One important process through which they are interrelated is that of investment or productive investment, production, wage rate, and और कौन सा है? बर्थ रेट. ठीक है, so through these what is happening? They are interrelated to each other. ये इसलिए बता रहा हूं because sometimes there can be or there are questions about the applications of system analysis or the systems theory. ठीक है? So there I will remind you this that we had studied the Marx theory. ठीक है? So you remember this. Okay. So हमें क्या करना है? We'll start. Suppose if I have to write about the Marx theory, we'll start with the basic idea of historical materialism. Then there is, it is based, he deduces one assumption that the capitalist society is categorized into two classes, capitalist and the labor class. So these capitalist and the labor class are the components of the capitalist society. They are interlinked to each other through these processes. And then you will explain, यहाँ पर जो अभी हमने explanations किए थे about the rich, what the rich is doing, it is the owner of the capital, and what it does, it is involved in investment of the capital or productive investment of the capital. With that, he produces factories and production systems are created. What is the ultimate objective? To make this production system efficient so that they can earn surplus capital or the profit. ठीक है? And through that surplus capital or the profit, there is capital accumulation taking place. And this capital accumulation will lead to further investment. And thus, it would keep on making them rich and rich. Okay? What they are essentially doing, they are exploiting the labor class. On the other hand, when it comes to the labor or the poor, they are owner of only one commodity, that is the labor. In response to capital accumulation by the rich, poor are involved in accumulation of labor. This is achieved by increase in birth rate. This means that supply of labor increases. The gap between, this would lead to increase in the gap between demand and supply of labor, and this would mean that there would be reduction in the wage rate. And wage rate, it would mean that there would be increase in poverty, further accumulation of labor, and the birth rate, so there is creation of industrial reserve army, which would mean there would be further reduction in the wage rate and even greater poverty. So ultimately in this process, what is happening? The poor or the labor is getting exploited. So as a result, what will be the demographic scenario in this section of population? Birth rates would be high. There will be so many population problems that they will be essentially facing. Okay? So if it continues, what will continue to happen? The problem will continue to become worse and worse. Okay? The gap between rich and poor would continue. So the only solution Marx suggests is a violent revolution, which would be done by the majority against the minority, and it would overthrow them as the owner of these resources. And through that, there will be a system established, which will be which type of system? A community controlled system, that is the communism. And through communism, ultimately we'll reach to the situation of optimum population, where there will be a continuous happiness. And जो हमने अभी बात की थी कि ultimately here technology will play very important role in making sure that the optimum population situation continues. ठीक है? So यही है basic theory of Marx. He has given lots of evidences. He has actually, if you talk about, if you read his book, he has done a very extensive study. He has used a dialectic method of study, and he has done lots of research on of the present day of that time prevailing capitalistic system, and through that he has given his theory. So it is no doubt a theory, the theory of historical materialism, but it is a kind of inductive theory which he formulated on the basis of the historical study which he did of European society of that time. ठीक है? Of majority by minority. I didn't get what you're saying. Revolution will be by majority, not minority. Hmm. Definitely, it is. Do you really think there will be a kind of revolution? They have all their safety mechanisms in place. Okay, there, I don't think there is going to be any revolution. If you go, for example, how many of you have worked in any IT company or something like that, MNCs, etc.? Okay, when you are working, did you realize that you are actually a labor? Can you understand? I was today only talking with one of the teachers, UPSC field, and he was telling me कि सर रिक्शे वालों का भी यूनियन होता है, हम लोगों का क्यों नहीं है? So what has happened? That concept of union, you see, the modern industries which are coming, they've ultimately, the concept of union is totally lost. So there are so many safety mechanisms. That is something theoretical concept. Will not go into that. बाद में बात करेंगे in radicalism. Okay. So that is the Marxian theory. Now let us think about the critical analysis. I'll give you 2 minutes. Think. सोचो कि क्या लिख सकते हैं. Okay. क्या लिख सकते हैं? What can be the critique of Marx? Hmm? You have to understand that his idea is uh, based upon criticism of capitalism. Okay, so we are talking about the capitalistic society. India is a mixed society. Okay, it is a mixed economy. Hmm. बात करते हैं. देखो, number of problems we find in the Marxian theory. First, can we start with the assumption itself? Yes or no? Tell me, can we say that the Marx assumption of division of society into singly two classes, only two classes, can we say it is too simplistic? Yes or no? Even that time there was middle class, although it was small, but it was there. Today in the modern society, can we say that the middle class has become the largest segment of most of the societies? ठीक है, सो इसको लिख लेते हैं। द मार्क्सिस्ट डिवीजन of the society into two classes of capitalists and labor seems to be too simplistic seems to be too simplistic full stop. Even in his own times in Europe, there was already existence of the middle class full stop. In the modern times, the middle class has become the largest segment of most of the societies. So that is one. Then can we say other things, like for example, he is critical of the role of technology. ठीक है, so देखो इसको सेकंड, मार्क्स इज critical of the role of technology in the capitalistic setup. Full stop. However, experience has shown that technological growth has been net positive. Technological growth has been net positive in generating employment opportunities. Tell me, can we give some examples? Recent time का कुछ example दे सकते हैं? Uber, Ola, Zomato, can we say they are outcome of these technological growths? ठीक है, so you can give several examples, like in recent times the emergence of startups like Zomato, Uber, Ola, etc. have provided large scale employment. ठीक है, once I went to one of the seminars, and in that seminar the discussion was about this role of technology in modern society. So one of the speakers who was speaking in favor of the role of technology, he gave these examples which I am giving you right now. ठीक है, so he was giving example कि technology ने कितना positive role play किया है. You see the case of Zomato, Uber, Ola. So I just raised my hand. I was sitting in the audience, and I raised my hand and I asked one question to him. Sir, can you tell me the timeline when ultimately the robots are going to replace the Zomato riders or ultimately machinery or the drones are going to ultimately replace these riders. Can we say अभी हम देख सकते हैं Tesla, already there is automatic cars are there. ठीक है. So वो जो मार्क्स का जो बेसिक कंसेप्शन है of that surplus, that is true when it is in the hand, when technology is actually in the hand of few greedy people. Technology in itself is not negative. Without technology we wouldn't have reached to where we are. Okay? That is why there is that idea of a mixed society, a control, a balanced one. A completely capitalist society, so much problems would be there. Okay? So that is another problem which we find. Then third, very big problem this is. Marx in this diagram, if you see, he is talking about that there will be ultimately what? Revolution. And after revolution, the society would reach to a communist and ideal society stage. Okay? But can we say in his theory, he hasn't elaborated on this transition period. What will be the conditions of this transitional society? What will be the processes which will be at work in these transitional societies? ठीक है, so इसको भी लिखते हैं. Marx advocated that through a violent revolution, an idealistic communist society would be developed. Society would be developed. Full stop. However, he remains silent. He remains silent with respect to the transition. With respect to the transition from a capitalist to a communist society. To a communist society. So stop. This is the reason many countries following the communist ideology found it difficult to manage this transition period. It's difficult to manage this transition period. ठीक है, फॉर एग्जाम्पल बाद में चाइना का पॉलिसी देखेंगे. If you talk about China, between the period of 1950 to 1970s, the China's policy was seesaw policy. Okay? So there was Mao Zedong and there was moderates. So when Mao was in there, he followed a pro-fertility policy. That means he didn't much care about the fertility. He allowed the fertility to grow. But moderates saw that fertility can be, if too much high fertility can be a problem. Too much big population growth means that ultimately the benefits of economic growth would not be reaching to the people. So whenever they came to power, they started to follow a ultimately anti-fertility policies. Okay? So that was this kind of flip-flop policy which was there, or seesaw policy. It was visible when China essentially adopted the same communist model. Okay? So China is a very good example. इसको लिख लो. For example, the population policy of China The population policy of China between 1950 to early 1970s exhibited a flip-flop or seesaw. Seesaw is a better word. A seesaw between pro and anti-fertility. Pro and anti-fertility policies. Okay, so this is another problem that we are finding. Next point. So now we can talk about this communist system. So according to Marx, basically what is the communism? It is a very idealistic state where the society continues to remain in the stage of optimum population. Okay? That means there will be continuous population growth taking place, and in a way the society is always at the replacement level of fertility, and lots of problems will not be there. For example, if a society remains at the replacement level of fertility, tell me, आज के टाइम में many developed countries are facing a problem of declining of population, aging of population. ठीक है? So those populations wouldn't arise in such an idealistic society because it is at the level of optimum population. ठीक है? But can we say that if we look into the case of Russia, is Russia facing the same problems which was faced by the capitalistic societies of the West? Russia's population is also what? It is declining. It is also aging. And very recently, we can say that now the same problem today, can we say, is it also being faced by China? It has also started. China is also beginning to face the problem of aging. ठीक है? So इसको भी लिख लेते हैं. For Marx, a communist society is an ideal society. Communist society is an ideal society where the population remains at the optimum levels. At the optimum levels. Full stop. However, the critiques have highlighted the situation of Russia. The situation of Russia, which is facing the same population problems, as that of the other developed countries of the West. Full stop. This means that there are some other processes which are determining the population patterns ठीक है. So that is another very significant criticism of Marx. Other criticism भी Marx का कर सकते हैं. Now यहाँ पर अगर हम देखें तो Marx seemed to be a humanist, a more humanist than Malthus. No doubt about that. Because ultimately what is happening here, the problem was which type? It was not nature created. Problem was created by whom? By the people, by the humans. So he seems to be more humanist than Malthus. In fact, the solution, if you talk about, is also created by whom? This revolution is done by the humans and they are establishing the communist system. Okay? But again, we see that he falls little bit from humanism. He's falling short of humanism. How he is falling short of humanism? Tell me, in दोनों systems में, can I say it is the system which is above the humans? Yes or no? If there is capitalism, does capitalism always means that there will be problems? Yes or no? Rich and poor का gap बढ़ता जाएगा, and what will happen? Poor will always be facing the problem. They will be characterized by several type of population problems. So can we say his ideas are very rigid? Yes or no? There is इस term, इसको हम एक term use करेंगे. You'll not understand this term here. Perspective में वो समझ में आएगा. His ideas are based on economic determinism. ठीक है? Determinism is an idea which believes that there is absence of free will. Our activities are determined by something else. Okay? So here what is happening? The economic factors, the politico-economic factors are determining all our actions. ठीक है? Tell me, reality में अगर हम देखें तो maximum जो welfare है, highest living standards and least inequality, can we say it is actually present in the capitalistic systems like the Scandinavian countries में, these are the countries where you'll actually find the least inequality in the world. ठीक है? So his ideas are actually very rigid, very determinist ideas. So लिख लो इसको. Next point. Marxist theory of population. Marxist theory of population is very rigid and is based upon the principle of economic determinism. Principle of economic determinism. Full stop. For Marx, capitalism is always associated with evils, and would always be characterized by population problems. Full stop. However, it is always not so. Full stop. In fact, in the modern times, highest level of prosperity and least inequality is characteristic of Scandinavian countries, which are examples of capitalistic society. ठीक है? So this is one. एक और point लिख लेते हैं, एंटी ह्यूमनिज्म वाला. So write this. Marxian theory of population. Marxian theory of population seems to be anti-humanist. Anti-humanist and suffers from structural determinism. Structural determinism. ठीक है, स्ट्रक्चर क्या होता है? कैपिटलिस्टिक स्ट्रक्चर, कम्युनिस्ट स्ट्रक्चर. ठीक है. So suppose what we are saying here, if someone wants to essentially solve his problems, उसको क्या करना पड़ेगा? उसको स्ट्रक्चर ही चेंज करना पड़ेगा. So individuals, if you talk about here, individual के ऊपर क्या आता है? It is structure becomes more important than the individual, and thus we can say that it falls short of humanism or it is anti-humanist. So लिख लो इसको. For example, in his theory, structure dominates the humans. Dominates the humans. Full stop. If he wants, or if human wants to improve their conditions, a new communist structure needs to be established. A new communist structure needs to be established, as it cannot be achieved under the existing structure of capitalism. Okay, so this is basically the critique of Marx. Then if we talk about if we have to appraise Marx, what are the positive contributions which have been done by Marx? I'll give you 1 minute, think. Hmm. Hmm. In a way, he is pro-government. Ultimately, who will be the community which will establish a kind of government that would be controlling most of the things? So you cannot say that. Okay, so what we can write about the if we have to praise Marx, क्या लिख सकते हैं इसके बारे में? Can we say one thing very clear? Has he provided a very systematic and logical criticism of a capitalistic society problems? Yes or no? Okay, that is first thing we can start with. So लिख लो, change the paragraph and say, despite all these criticisms, comma, it is fair to say that Marx has provided a very systematic critique of the capitalistic society. Full stop. It helps us to understand some basic limitations of a capitalistic structure. Full stop. For example, he has rightly pointed out he has rightly pointed out that continued poverty can lead to even bigger population problems. Full stop. Market would not be interested in providing services to this poor population. Full stop. Thus there is need for intervention at a community or government levels. So can you understand? If we continue from the capitalistic system, can we say the poor, the majority, would remain in the vicious circle of poverty and the conditions would continue to deteriorate? So what is needed? Do we need some outside injections are needed? Yes or no? Interventions are needed. Like for example, today, if government of India is running several schemes on education, on poverty, can we say that definitely this would help to break that vicious cycle? It would contribute to break that vicious cycle. If people are going, suppose think karo ki, suppose there was no Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, okay? Ultimately, what would have happened? Most of the poor people would have continued to send their children for child labor, and this would mean that they would get more income for children, and the same thing which Marx is saying, it would have continued. But now, because they are sending their children to the schools, this means that they are not earning that extra income. Only children means that there is expenditure only. It is not income. So very clearly, we can say that has been one of the factors which has led to the recent, if you talk about, one of the important policies which has led to the recent decline in the fertility in India. And again, we need to do such interventions, such welfare interventions. Okay. So again, we find, do many of the countries, or most of the countries, in fact, if you talk about, do they follow a mixed policy? Okay. So that is essentially the application of the Marxist idea. ठीक है, क्योंकि मार्क्स का अगर हम देखें तो ज़्यादा, अगर if we look into, most of it is criticism, and his ideas are so much radical. ठीक है, because उसको implement करने के लिए पूरा का पूरा system ही change करना पड़ेगा. ठीक है, so this is the biggest problem in praising Marx. बहुत सारे points नहीं हैं, but still एक आध point और लिख लेते हैं. You right? Next point, Marx should also be appraised praised for for clearly defining the role of wage rates, the role of wage rates in in the demographic processes, in the demographic processes. Full stop. Thus, to control population, comma, it is necessary that the living standards of the people increase. ठीक है. So देखो, अगर वेज रेट बढ़ता है, how this would affect fertility? If there is increase in wage rate, so if you are getting more wages, you have two type of needs. ठीक है. Every person has two type of needs. One is the survival needs, and second is the luxury needs. ठीक है. So what will happen if the wages increase? Can I say a person's expenditure of the luxury would increase? Yes or no? ठीक है. लग्जरी नीड्स बढ़ने लगेंगी. लग्जरी नीड्स, जो लग्जरी होती है, इट इज लाइक अ नशा, नशा की तरह है. लिटरली इट इज लाइक दैट. Once you have started to experience those luxuries, it is very, very difficult for you to go back. ठीक है. So when there is the luxury consumption is higher, people will now be forced to think whether to have more children or not. Because having more children means what? You will have to compromise on your luxury needs. ठीक है. So that is the role of consumption in determining the fertility. So he very clearly highlights the role of wage rate. It was also done by Malthus, but it was more implicit in the Malthusian theory. In Marxian theory, it becomes more explicit. ठीक है. So that is another. Few other things जो मटेरियल में नहीं लिखा हुआ है, एक और पॉइंट लिख लो. Marx should also be appreciated. Marx should also be appreciated for his writings on the positive role of women in the society. In the society. Full stop. He was of the view that women should be empowered. If the population problems were to be solved. If the population problems were to be solved. Okay. So that was his idea. If there is women empowerment, ultimately that would lead to decline in the fertilities. And with decline in the fertility, what will happen? There, the more economic benefits would pass on to the people. So he was very positive in the terms of the role of women in the society. Okay. So these are the few appraisals we can write. I'm giving you one question as a homework, which we'll be discussing tomorrow, and you will do this activity at home. और जब मैं कल इसको डिस्कस करूंगा, then you will check yourself and give yourself marks. So that means if you don't write, you won't be able to do this activity. Okay. So the question is, compare the population ideas of Malthus and Marx. And I'm giving you this as a 15 marker. 15 marks question. Okay, so we will see lots of comparison. You can understand comparison is both similarity and differences you have to write about. Okay, so that is the Marxian theory. अब third जो models and theories है उस पे आता हूँ मैं directly. ठीक है, and there is still 20 minutes, so we'll be able to discuss number of things about that. It is the demographic transition theory. Demographic transition theory. ठीक है, so as I told you, demographic transition theory क्या है? It is the contemporary major theory of population. And this is the most important theory for us because we will be using it at several places. हमारे लिए दो theories बहुत important है, Malthus and demographic transition theory. ठीक है, so if we talk about the demographic transition theory, basic GS में भी पढ़ा होगा तुम लोगों ने demographic transition. So demographic transition theory क्या कहता है कि in a society there are situations So this is the stage 1, this is the stage 2, stage 3, and today we are even talking about stage 5. ठीक है, so इसको कहते हैं, this stage is referred to as early stationary या फिर इसको high stationary. High stationary stage. Then this is referred to as the early expanding stage. This is referred to as the late expanding. This is referred to as low stationary. As the low stationary. ठीक है, फिफ्थ को नाम नहीं दिया है because fifth is something which is very recent. Some scholars are suggesting that on the experience of the developed countries, today we should be talking about the fifth stage of demographic transition. ठीक है? So demographic transition theory क्या कहता है? Essentially that in a society there is transitions taking place. Transitions here, can you see there are two rates which are given, and there is, this is the birth rate, and this, if you talk about, is the death rate. ठीक है? अब इसकी वजह से क्या होगा? What will be the population here? It will be something like this. And however, has the gap between birth rate and death rate increased here? So as a result, एक थोड़ा सा इसमें you just इसको ऐसे बनाओ. Actually, you have to remember that at the late second stage, the fertility begins to decline. ठीक है? So if you talk about population, in the early expanding, population would increase. In the late expanding, it would further increase. And यहाँ पर फिर से क्या हो जाएगा? It would become stable. And in fact, in stage 5 today, what we see, it is even declining. Can you see here? Birth rate has become less than the death rate. So in many societies, in many countries, if you talk about, the population is beginning to decline. ठीक है? So you remember that S curve जो हमने बनाया था of population. So does it looks like that S curve? It is like that. It is essentially that S curve of population. ठीक है? So that is basically the case of the demographic transition theory. So demographic transition theory क्या कहता है? In any society, there is transition of the birth rates and death rates taking place. And as a result, or in fact, along with this birth rate and death rate, there will be other transitions which would also taking place. Socio-economic conditions of the society would also transition along with these birth rates and death rates. They are in fact intricately complicated. They are related to each other. So all of these are transitioning, and simultaneously, thus what happens, demography of the society also changes. Okay? So that is the basic idea of the demographic transition theory. Now, if we talk about the demographic transition theory, when it was given originally, it was given by Thomson and Notestein had given this theory. Thomson and Notestein. Okay, when they originally gave the theory, originally the theory had 3 stages. This theory had 3 stages. Okay, or what were the 3 stages of the theory? Second and third were 1. They were treated as one stage. Okay, and what was this stage? This is the transition stage. This was essentially the transition stage. So can you see? ट्रांजिशन हो रहा है इस पीरियड में. इज देयर ट्रांजिशन ऑफ डेथ रेट? यस और नो? डज द ट्रांजिशन बिगिंस विद द ट्रांजिशन ऑफ डेथ रेट? बट इनिशियली बर्थ रेट इज अनऑब्लाइजिंग, इट रिमेन्स हाई. Can we see that ultimately the birth rate also begins to decline? It also begins to transition. So initially when they formulated the theory, there was stage 1, 2 and 3. Only 3 stages were there. Later writers subsequently, they divided the stage 2 into 2 parts. The early expanding and the late expanding, because in early expanding, can you see that there is only transition of death rate? In late expanding, what happens? The birth rate or the fertility also begins to transition. Okay? And on the basis of that, what they did, they divided it into two parts. So thus the if you talk about demographic transition model became 4-stage model. अब recent times में क्या हो रहा है? We will see, we'll talk about this later, that in the developed countries, some of the developed countries, the fertility is becoming very, very low. ठीक है? It has become very low. It has gone below the death rate, despite the fact that even death rate is declining. ठीक है? Recent times में हम देखेंगे कि even death rate is declining. I still remember मेरी क्लास जब I was in my वेकेशंस थी हमारी क्लास 10th के बाद, तो मेरे को जोश बहुत चढ़ा, तो मैं जिम पहुंच गया एक्सरसाइज करने. तो आई जॉइंड अ जिम ड्यूरिंग दैट वेकेशन पीरियड्स. तो वहां पर एक पतला सा लड़का था और उसकी बड़ी रिस्पेक्ट करते थे सब. आई यूज टू थिंक यार इसकी तो कोई मसल्स वसल्स भी नहीं है, व्हाई एवरीवन इज सो मच रिस्पेक्टिंग हिम. लेटर मुझे पता चला कि दैट पर्सन हैड अ बुक ऑफ बॉडी बिल्डिंग. आर्नल्ड श्वार्ज़नेगर की एक बुक आती थी एंड ही हैड बॉट दैट बुक. तो इसलिए सब उसके रिस्पेक्ट करते थे कि वो बुक मिल जाए. ठीक है? Why it is important? Because what I am trying to say here, if you go some time back, the awareness information about health, it was very limited. Okay, it was very, very limited. But have you seen that there has been explosion of this information in recent times? Everywhere you'll find कि अपने health को कैसे better करो. There is so much of information available. ठीक है? So we'll see that actually it started in the developed world around 1980s. ठीक है? 70s and 80s में they realized कि fertility बढ़ाने के methods fail हो चुके हैं. So whatever people they have to increase their longevity. And we will see that ultimately from that period, they invested in health, they made people aware about good living style, and the mortalities in those countries have drastically declined. But despite this decline in mortality, what we find that fertility still continues to decline and it is still lower than that very low mortality. Okay? So there are some countries of the developed world which are located in stage 5 and are experiencing a negative population growth rate. Okay? And that is the reason why in recent times some have suggested that we should create a separate stage add a separate stage in the demographic transition, that is the stage 5. ठीक है? So that is the framework of demographic transition. Now अब कुछ जनरल बातें करें demographic transition की. तो first is this one we have talked about. So how it has grown from a 3-stage model to finally to 4, and now we are talking about a 5-stage model. ठीक है? Then another very important feature of the demographic transition theory is that these people, Thompson and Notestein, who formulated this theory originally, it was, we can say that it is an inductive model or theory. It is essentially an inductive model or theory. So what is induction? When you go from general to or particular to general. ठीक है? We go from individual examples to a common law. ठीक है? That is inductive. So this theory, if we talk about, they formulated it on the demographic history, on the study of demographic history of which countries? The first world countries. ठीक है? So this theory, if you want, you can write, is based upon what? It is based upon the demographic history of the first world countries. ठीक है. So it is an inductive model. Although what has happened later, the followers of this theory, they made it a more universal theory. So that is another feature of the demographic transition theory. Now, there are other aspects of the demographic transition theory. So material में लिखा हुआ है. We'll just go to that. So if you talk about the demographic transition theory, very important thing is it has which type of orientation? A possibilistic, or we can also say humanistic orientation it has. ठीक है. It is based upon the concept of demographic regulation. Based upon the concept of demographic regulation. And what this idea of demographic regulation says, it states that man is able to foresee a demographic catastrophe before it arrives, and it is able to take necessary actions or adaptive actions long before the nature forces the same upon him. Okay? So it is based upon the concept of demographic regulation. So tell me, can we say that this theory is focusing upon humans rather than systems or nature? Who is bringing the change here? It is the human, it is the individuals who are bringing the change here. It is irrespective of any type of space. It is irrespective of any type of system. Okay? No matter where the humans would be able to do what? They would be able to foresee a catastrophe and thus take necessary actions. Okay? I hope it is clear. So that is the case. This point we have already talked about. Now, the theory, very, very important, this point, this we have already talked about. So the theory postulates a particular pattern of fertility and mortality which causes a demographic change. And three very important processes which are there in the transition which is taking place. First very important thing is that decline in mortality comes before decline in fertility. Okay? So it always comes before decline in fertility. Second, eventually the fertility declines to match the mortality. So did we saw this same thing here? First, there is decline of mortality or the death rate. Eventually, there is decline of fertility as well. And is it beginning to match mortality? So that's the second very important point. Third, simultaneous with this change, there is also what? Socio-economic transformation of the society occurs simultaneously with demographic transition. Okay? So it is occurring simultaneously with demographic transition, changes in the society. ठीक है. So this is the three important points जो याद रखने हैं बिल्कुल. First, mortality decline, then fertility, and simultaneously other changes are taking place. ठीक है. So that is one. एक और important aspect क्या है? It is important to note that at any point of time, different countries or areas of the world are at different stages of demographic transition. ठीक है. इंडिया में ही अगर हम देखें, can we say Kerala is a state which is already in the fourth stage of demographic transition? On the other hand, if we talk about a state like Bihar, it is still in the second stage of demographic transition. Okay? So, at any given point of time, different areas of the world would be found in different stages of demographic transition. Now question arises why it is so. So reason is very simple, because humans have dual characteristics, dual nature. And what is the dual nature of the human beings? We are behaving as two type of species, biological species and cultural species. Okay? So biologically, humans are everywhere involved in the process of reproduction. But culturally, they differ. It is this cultural diversity that gives rise to variability and variations in the demographic rates, resulting in different countries lying in different stages of demographic transition. Okay? So that is the aspect of demographic transition. We'll continue this tomorrow and try to solve that answer. अभी मैंने करवाया नहीं, because I know कि marks was little bit complicated. So it is not still concretized in your mind. And जिसने रिवाइज किया होगा उसके दिमाग में माल्थस तो खैर कंक्रेटाइज हो गया होगा, but because I know majority was in the second category, so please go and revise Malthus also and Marx also, and then do the comparison. Okay? And we'll talk about that first thing in the class tomorrow. Goodbye, take care. Vikrant, I will talk to office about that. It will try to do as soon as possible.